Today, we're diving into a word you hear all the time, average. But you know, behind that one simple word, there's actually a pretty big statistical showdown happening. We're going to break down the three main contenders for the title of the best average and figure out which one really comes out on top. So let's just start right there. When someone talks about the average salary for a job or the average temperature in July, what are they really talking about? It sounds so simple, right? But the answer, well, it's actually way more interesting than you might think. Okay, so here's the fundamental challenge for anybody who works with data. How do you take a whole bunch of different numbers, test scores, prices, whatever, and boil it all down to just one single number that represents the entire group? Statisticians have a term for this. They call it finding the central tendency. It's all about finding that one typical representative value in a whole sea of information. And this is where it gets really cool. It turns out there isn't just one right way to find that representative score. Nope. Statisticians have come up with three totally different methods. You can think of them as three contenders, all battling it out for the title of best average. So let's meet our first and, honestly, most famous contender, the mean. This is the one you almost definitely learned about back in school. The mean is what most of us just call the average. Finding it is pretty straightforward arithmetic. You just add up all the scores you have, and then you divide that total by the number of scores you added up. Simple as that. Now, I know that formula might look a little intense with the Greek letters and all, but the idea behind it is incredibly simple. Just imagine you're taking the total amount of whatever you're measuring, let's say pizza slices, and you're sharing them out completely equally among everyone in the group. That's the mean. Here's another really great way to think about the mean. Picture it as the balance point for all your data. If you imagined every data point had a little weight and you placed them all on a seesaw, the mean is the exact spot you'd have to put the fulcrum to make it perfectly balanced. And what that means is that every single score, big or small, has an effect on where that balance point ends up. All right, let's bring in our second contender, the median. Now, if the mean is all about finding the balance, the median is all about finding the middle. The median strategy is totally different. Its one and only mission is to find the physical midpoint of the data. It's the score that's literally sitting right in the middle of the pack. And finding it is super easy. You just line up all your scores in order from the smallest to the largest, and then you find the number that's smack dab in the center. That's your median. It splits the whole group perfectly in half, so you have exactly 50% of the scores above it and 50% below it. So here's the really crucial thing to get about the median. It doesn't care about the actual values of the other scores. Not at all. It only cares about its rank, its position in that lineup. A super high score or a crazy low score won't budge the median one bit, as long as it stays on its side of the halfway mark. And that brings us to our third and final contender, who has a completely different take on what makes a score typical. Let's talk about the mode. You can think of the mode as the people's champion. It couldn't care less about balance or position in line. For the mode, it is a pure popularity contest. The mode is just the score or the category that shows up more often than any of the others. This example right here with the favorite restaurants perfectly shows off the mode's unique superpower. It is the only measure of average that works for things that aren't numbers, what we call categorical data. I mean, you can't calculate the mean of Luigi's and George and Harry's, right? But you can absolutely find the most popular one. That's the mode. Okay, so our three contenders are in the ring. We have the mean fighting for balance, the median fighting for the middle position, and the mode fighting for popularity. So, in the final showdown, which one is the best? Who wins? Well, it turns out there's no single winner that takes the crown every time. The champion actually depends entirely on the situation. And the judge in this whole contest is the shape of your data's distribution. Basically, is your data nice and symmetrical, or is it kind of lopsided or skewed? Now, when your data is perfectly symmetrical, when it makes that classic bell curve shape, it's a three-way tie. The mean, the median, and the mode, they all end up in pretty much the exact same spot, right in the center. In a perfect world like this, any one of them does a great job of telling you what's typical. But let's be real, data in the real world is rarely that perfect. So what happens when the fight isn't so fair? What if you have a few really extreme scores, what statisticians call outliers, that kind of stretch the data out and make it skewed? And this is where we see the mean's big weakness. Those extreme scores, the outliers, they act like a powerful magnet. because the mean is that balance point that has to account for every single value. Those huge outliers will literally pull it away from the center, dragging it out towards that long tail.
But just look at the median. It's not even flinching. Because it only cares about that middle position, it's not affected by those crazy outliers. It holds its ground right where the bulk of the scores actually are. This is why for things like income or house prices, where you have some really high values, the median almost always gives you a much more realistic, typical picture than the mean does.
So as you can see, there isn't one single champion. The best way to measure average totally depends on your data and what story you're trying to tell. And that's great because it means you have this powerful toolkit for understanding and talking about information way more accurately.
So think of this as your quick cheat sheet for picking the right champion. You're going to use the mean when your data is numerical and pretty symmetrical. You'll go with the median when you've got skewed data with some of those extreme scores. And you'll pick the mode when you just want to find the most frequent thing, or when you're working with categories instead of numbers.
And that really brings us to the most important takeaway here. Now that you know the difference, you can be a much, much smarter consumer of data. So the next time you see a news report about the average home price or the average income, you'll know to ask that all-important question. Are they talking about the mean, which can be skewed by mansions and billionaires? Or are they talking about the median, which shows you the true middle? Because that answer, it tells you everything.